The story of Adam was never meant to explain humanity. It was meant to explain a replacement. The idea that the first man appeared out of nothing, created fresh, flawless, and ignorant, is a control mechanism, a restart myth. But if you follow the physical and genetic breadcrumbs, if you trace what's been systematically edited from our records, you start seeing something else entirely. There were people before Adam. Intelligent, structured, technologically capable. They weren't myth. They were erased. These are the pre-Adamites, the ones who existed before the so-called divine prototype. Every culture has a buried echo of them, the elder race, the builders, the watchers, the shining ones, the ancestors who fell from favor and were buried beneath earth, sea, and ice. When the dominant religions codified their origin stories, these older beings became threats. Their memory had to be sterilized. So they were turned into monsters, demons, fallen angels, or giants. Myth was the perfect disinfectant for inconvenient history. Let's hit this surgically. You find ancient skulls elongated, massive cranial volumes, genetic markers that don't match any modern lineage, but somehow those fossils get lost, mislabeled, or locked in private collections. Every time an anomalous skeleton surfaces, one that doesn't fit Homo sapiens, it disappears into the same black hole of further study. Convenient. Because if the public ever saw undeniable physical proof of an intelligent pre-human species, the Adam narrative would implode overnight. Look at how the texts describe creation: man formed after a rebellion, after a destruction. That's not a beginning, that's reconstruction. Adam isn't the start of humanity, he's the reboot of a failed project. Something was here before, something went wrong, and the slate was wiped clean. Genesis reads like a sanitized damage report. The pre-Adamites weren't fictional ancestors, they were the original occupants, removed to make room for a controllable model. Now ask yourself this: why does nearly every ancient tradition mention gods creating mankind as laborious, as servants, as caretakers? Because that's what happens after a reset. The new species doesn't inherit freedom, it inherits function. The pre-Adamites may have been autonomous, advanced, ungovernable. The replacement needed to obey. That's what the myth hides, not divine creation, but replacement engineering. Archaeologically, there are signs of abrupt discontinuities, cities built with technology beyond the skill set of their supposed builders, then sudden regression. Cultures that go from advanced stonework back to primitive tools with no transitional phase. That's not evolution. That's interruption. That's what a reset looks like. The knowledge didn't vanish, it was withdrawn. The new tenants were never meant to understand the architecture they were living on. When you strip the theology and politics out, the pre-Adamite idea becomes brutally clear: Earth wasn't an empty stage waiting for humans. It was already occupied. Then came the purge. Cataclysm, flood, pole shift, call it what you want. The event buried an entire epoch, wiped memory, reshuffled climate zones, and froze the remains under thousands of feet of ice. The survivors, if any, became myths themselves, whispering their story into the DNA of the next generation. Let's go deeper into biology. The human genome is a patchwork. You've got sudden jumps, rapid cognitive expansion that can't be explained by natural selection alone. That's not me saying aliens, that's me saying intervention. Something interfered. Something manipulated. Maybe to downgrade. Maybe to control. The pre-Adamites might have been genetically superior, longer-lived, telepathic, capable of manipulating energy directly instead of through crude machinery. Imagine that lineage being deemed dangerous, replaced by something weaker, more dependent, more programmable. That's what the Adamic model represents, not the dawn of intelligence, but the domestication of it. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because it means you're finally seeing the pattern. Every empire on Earth imitates that blueprint: destroy the original culture, rewrite its history, repopulate its land, then declare your version the beginning. Humanity didn't invent that cycle, it inherited it. The pre-Adamite civilization wasn't primitive. Think global, not tribal. Think networked, not scattered. They could have been continental, maybe even interplanetary, before the crash. The evidence sits in the geometry of ancient sites aligned to celestial coordinates long lost to Earth's current axial tilt. They built for the sky. They built like they knew something catastrophic was coming. Their architecture isn't decorative, it's coded. Energy fields, acoustic harmonics, ley line intersections, all integrated with planetary frequencies. That's not religion. That's engineering. When the new humans appeared, they inherited fragments of that tech but no instruction manual. So they worshipped it. They built temples on top of energy nodes, mimicking structures they didn't understand. The pre-Adamite monuments became sacred sites. The knowledge became the mystery schools. The power that once ran through the planet got ritualized, then suppressed. That's why the further back you go, the more advanced the ruins, because we're looking at the wreckage of the original operating system. There's another layer, the anatomical evidence. Some pre-Adamite remains show elongated skulls not caused by artificial deformation, with cranial capacities 25 to 30% larger than ours. That's not vanity binding, that's biology. That means a brain built for different processing, maybe multidimensional perception. And notice the response: instant dismissal, instant burial. Museums have entire vaults of anomalous bones that will never be displayed. Why? Because displaying them rewrites theology, anthropology, and controls structures overnight. People hear pre-Adamite and immediately think myth, but the myth is a smokescreen. The physical data has always been here, scattered across Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, the Arctic, and yes, Antarctica. And when you overlay those discovery sites onto a global grid, they line up with ancient power corridors, as if they were built along the same planetary architecture. Coincidence doesn't repeat itself with that level of precision. Imagine what that civilization looked like. Not primitive huts or fire pits, but crystal architecture that resonated with Earth's frequency. Cities that glowed from within, powered by the magnetic field itself. Transportation that didn't burn fuel but bent light. Communication that didn't need devices because thought was already the signal. That's not fantasy, that's what every myth points to before the fall. A civilization too advanced to control, so it was erased and replaced by one that could be. Even the story of angels being cast down mirrors this, luminous beings losing their station, condemned to the lower realm. That's the pre-Adamite story repackaged in theological code. The fallen weren't rebels, they were survivors. They refused to conform to the new order. The victors wrote them as villains because they wouldn't kneel. That's how history always works: whoever controls the present controls the past. You can feel how deep this goes. Because if the pre-Adamites existed, it means humanity's origin is just a sequel. We are living in someone else's aftermath. The ruins under the ice, the fossils that don't fit, the genetic anomalies, all of it points to a species that came before us, one that mastered the planet and was wiped out, not by nature, but by design. There's another disturbing angle: certain secret programs allegedly working in Antarctica aren't studying ice cores. They're studying DNA samples extracted from remains. Reports mention tissue that hasn't fully fossilized, implying preservation far beyond normal conditions. If they're retrieving biological data from pre-Adamite specimens, that means the technology to revive or replicate them already exists. That's not archaeology. That's resurrection. And if you think governments wouldn't weaponize ancient DNA, you haven't been paying attention to human nature. The genetic record of a superior species is the ultimate prize, not to honor them, but to extract their advantages, their resistance, their cognition. If the pre-Adamites were indeed the builders, their genome might hold the key to energy manipulation, psychic communication, or longevity, capabilities humanity once had and lost. That's what the secrecy protects. So what do we have? Fossils hidden, sites restricted, genetics classified, and an entire religious narrative built to overwrite memory. The pre-Adamites aren't gone, they're buried, literally under miles of ice, and metaphorically under layers of doctrine. The evidence doesn't vanish, it's quarantined. The story doesn't die, it's rewritten. And the species that came after, us, walks the surface, unaware we're standing on the bones of our predecessors. You don't need belief for this. You just need pattern recognition. The architecture is too precise, the alignments too consistent, the edits too aggressive. Something existed before us. Something capable of shaping continents, constructing perfect geometry, and then disappearing under ice that wasn't supposed to be there yet. That's not an accident. That's history buried alive. I want you to ask yourself, what if the narrative of first man, first woman, Eden, beginning of time is not the beginning, but a cover story? What if there were beings, cultures, technologies, and power structures before Adam, hidden beneath the ice, silenced by cold, by time, by gatekeepers of history? We start here with Section 1, Rise from the Ice, the awakening of a secret civilization beneath Antarctica. Picture Antarctica, endless white emptiness. A continent we're told is barren, lifeless, a frozen wasteland. A place where human history stops. Easy, neat, safe. But what if that imagery is a lie? What if beneath that sheet of ice lies something raw, significant, a missing chapter of our origin story? The very idea flips the script. Here's the hard first cut. Mainstream archaeology teaches us humans emerged here, then there, the usual linear pattern. But this story? It suggests a different timeline, one that reaches backwards. The idea, pre-Adamites, beings who walked before the so-called beginning. And Antarctica might just hold their trace. How? First flip, the famous Piri race map, drawn in 1513. It shows a landmass in the southern hemisphere that aligns more closely with the coastline of Antarctica without its ice sheet. Which means someone, thousands of years ago, had knowledge of a place no one else had seen. The map implies the ice hadn't formed then, or at least, wasn't there to dominate the geography. If that's real, it means Antarctica once had a very different environment, and the beings who mapped it had access to knowledge that conventional history dismisses. The idea detonates the assumption that human civilization started in Mesopotamia and then radiated outward. Instead, what if the cradle was somewhere deeply hidden? And what if the ice came after, burying the truth? Now, look at it this way, the ice sheet of Antarctica, truly massive, thousands of feet deep in places, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles. It's not just snow and cold. It's a time machine. A tomb. A vault. The sheet protects or hides. When you stand at its edge, you're literally standing above eons of silence. And silence is intentional. Because if a civilization existed beneath that ice, their story, technology, structures, their world, could upend everything. Science isn't saying yes, here it is, but the openness to the possibility is growing. Scientists using radar and sediment analysis are beginning to show that there was a radically different landscape under the ice, a world once green, with rivers and valleys. The clues are there. So you are here, watching now. I want you to recognize this isn't comfortable. This isn't the story you learned at school. This is insurgent. This is revelation. Because if an advanced group lived on Antarctica before the ice, then everything about our origin story, about us, must be re-examined. Our first man may not have been the first. Our beginning may be a second act. Ask yourself, if we're standing on top of that lid of ice, how much of history lies beneath? And who put that lid there, and why? Who benefits from us believing the story ends at Adam and Eve, when the evidence, controversial, ignored, silenced, suggests something far older? Now, I don't want you to tune out when someone says this is fringe theory. Because you and I both know, what's labeled fringe often becomes accepted later when fresh evidence knocks the door down. The question is not is it wild, but what if it's real? And here's something for you to engage. Imagine you discovered evidence of massive structures beneath the ice. Think pyramids. Think citygrids. Think a system of power and knowledge running hundreds of thousands of years old. What would you do with that information? Who would you tell? Who would try to bury it again? Because the fact is, secret histories are often buried deliberately. I'm talking to you now, yes, you watching this on your screen. Think about what it means if you are part of the first generation to ask these questions openly again. To dig under the ice, metaphorically and literally. To challenge the narrative that someone wrote and selected for you. Because beneath Antarctica's ice may lie the blueprint of a civilization that our textbooks refuse to include. So what are we looking at? A dormant continent. A sleeping archive. A world that might have existed long before human memory. Yes, the ice sheet is the vault. And yes, the vault is opening, bit by bit. Because geological research in recent years found large subterranean landforms beneath Antarctica's ice, ridges, valleys, rivers long dead. Before the ice sheet quashed them. Before the horizon froze. When you stare at an Antarctic glacier, you're staring at more than frozen water, you're staring at time locked. And when you recognize time locked, you recognize control. The beings who walked before us, if they existed, would hold secrets of energy, of knowledge, of architecture, of life beyond survival. And we are only now reaching the edge of the ice. Let me ask you, if you were in that lost civilization, what would you build? Would you hide your legacy? Would you entomb it under ice so that another lineage rises and forgets you? That's the crucial shock here. Because the first humans we know might have been the successors. The inheritors. The reset. And we live now on their terms, on the terms of the narrative they allowed us to inherit. You've been told history is a straight line, primitive cavemen, then pyramids, then progress. But what if that line was a circle? What if entire empires rose and burned out before the first line of Genesis was ever written? That's what we're dealing with here, the erased chapter, the evidence that refuses to die, the fingerprints of something that existed before the world was rebooted. And let's get one thing straight, we're not talking about folklore. We're talking about physical traces that don't fit the script. Artifacts, maps, coordinates, patterns that imply intelligence, precision, and global reach thousands of years before history officially began. You think that's impossible? Then explain how a 16th century map shows the exact Antarctic coastline, drawn centuries before modern radar even confirmed its shape. Explain how ancient structures all over the planet share mathematical symmetry that shouldn't exist without advanced geometry. Explain how myths from continents that never met all describe a golden age drowned in ice and flood. That's not coincidence. That's erasure. Civilizations don't vanish neatly. They leave behind shadows, shards of architecture, unexplained anomalies, buried geometries that whisper of something older. When the official record doesn't know what to do with those shards, it labels them mysteries, files them under mythology, and moves on. But the patterns stay. And when you line them up, when you connect the dots, the erasure starts to look deliberate. I want you to picture a timeline, not flat, but fractured. Imagine a point before known civilization, a culture that mastered mapping, astronomy, earth engineering. Now imagine the cataclysm that hits, planetary tilt, crust displacement, massive glaciation. Within days, their cities are gone, buried, frozen, scrubbed clean. The survivors scatter. Some reach South America, some North Africa, some Asia, carrying fragments of what they once knew. Those fragments later appear as sudden inventions in Sumer, in Egypt, in Mesoamerica. That's not random genius. That's inherited memory. That's reconstruction from ruins. You see the connection now? This is not about frozen pyramids or alien fantasies. It's about the pattern of knowledge that was too advanced to come from nowhere, yet too ancient to fit the accepted chart. It's about what happens when a species resets itself and the last survivors pass fragments to the next wave. And maybe, just maybe, Antarctica was the archive of that first wave. There's a reason the global elite locked down that continent tighter than any other place on Earth. You can't move freely there. You can't dig where you want. Every expedition is filtered through government or military clearance. Why? Because if that ice hides ruins, or technology, or relics of a pre-human epoch, that's not just archaeology, that's the kind of discovery that rewrites control itself. Now stay sharp here, because this is where things get ugly. Imagine you are a power structure built on being the beginning. Your entire legitimacy depends on the idea that you are the first, that your story starts it all. What happens if a layer older than your God, your empire, your science is found? You collapse. So what do? You erase. You sanitize. You make sure that if something older is ever found, it's instantly labeled a hoax, a fringe theory, a conspiracy. That's not paranoia, that's how institutions survive. Control the narrative, control the past. Control the past, control belief. Now let's zoom in on the anomalies. Satellite imagery has revealed geometric shapes under the Antarctic ice, triangular peaks, evenly spaced, aligned almost too perfectly. The official line, natural formations. Sure. But nature doesn't usually produce equilateral geometry that lines up with planetary meridians. Something built those, or carved them, long before that ice hardened. And the more you dig, the more it feels like someone already knew they'd be buried. There are whispers about subglacial tunnels stretching for miles, vast caverns warmed by geothermal heat, perfect for shelter, perfect for preservation. And radar has shown cavities down there, massive hollows the size of small cities. You think nature carved perfect domes under 2 miles of ice? You think those cavities just happen to line up with magnetic anomalies and geometric grid points? Come on. Look, this is not fairy tale thinking. This is forensic thinking. When you see repetition across geography, time, and myth, you're looking at data that's been scrubbed of its label. And right now, Antarctica is the biggest scrubbed data set on the planet. Ask yourself, how do you erase a civilization? You don't need to destroy it physically. You just need to make sure nobody knows it ever existed. You bury it, freeze it, misclassify it, ridicule anyone who asks about it. Then you replace its story with a cleaner version. You call that cleaner version the beginning. That's what's been done. And yet, the cracks are showing. Geological surveys keep finding sediment patterns that don't fit a 30-million-year ice cover. There are hints of ancient riverbeds, forests, fossils, meaning this wasn't always a frozen void. And if that's true, the land beneath was once habitable. So who lived there? What did they build? And what traces remain locked under the ice? This is where it gets almost cinematic. Imagine a world where our ancestors, or something like us, mastered technology that wasn't based on combustion or industry but resonance, magnetism, geometry. Technology that could shape matter through sound, energy through form. We call that myth now, the music of the spheres, the builders before the flood. But myth remember things history forgets. And the relics of those builders may still be buried under kilometers of ice, humming silently, waiting. It's easy to laugh until you start mapping global ruins. Baalbek, Giza, Teotihuacan, Nan Madol, they all line up along ancient equatorial bands, as if the planet's skin shifted after they were built. If Antarctica was part of that alignment before the shift, that would explain why its remnants now sit under the South Pole. The Earth itself might have moved, dragging that civilization into night. So here's the raw logic: a pre-Adamite civilization flourished. A global event, maybe cosmic, maybe terrestrial, wiped them out. Their cities froze, their knowledge fragmented. Later generations inherited fragments and rewrote them as myths. Modern man was not the first dawn but the next dusk. Antarctica is the black box, the final archive. And that's exactly why you're not allowed to touch it. Every few years we get a leak, a blurred image, a strange structure, a military flight plan that doesn't add up. Then silence. That's how controlled information looks. It leaks just enough to test reaction, then disappears behind classified status. If nothing existed under the ice, there'd be nothing to classify. Yet here we are, decades deep into secrecy. You watching right now, think about how much effort goes into maintaining the illusion of an empty continent. Billions in logistics, bases, treaties, zones you can't enter. Why guard nothing? Why fund silence? Because if those ruins are real, they are older than our history, older than religion, older than everything we've been told defines humanity. And whoever controls that revelation controls the rewrite of human identity. We're stepping inside the ice. This isn't speculation anymore. This is where the physical evidence starts bleeding through. Beneath Antarctica's miles-thick ice sheet, radar scans have detected massive geometric structures, domes, walls, corridors, and something that looks suspiciously like a complex network, not random geology. The official line says unnatural formations. But nature doesn't do straight lines, 90-degree angles, and perfect hexagonal symmetry buried 2 miles deep. Now imagine this, a radar image of a triangular formation stretching nearly 2 kilometers across, sharp-edged, perfectly aligned along magnetic coordinates. You can see the vertices clean as daylight. Scientists label it a nunatak, a mountain peak poking through the ice. Convenient label. But zoom in, and you see the symmetry, a triangle so perfect it defies random erosion. People call it the Antarctic Pyramid. They dismiss it instantly because the implications are too big. You can't have a pyramid under Antarctic ice without rewriting everything about who built it, when, and why. Let's break this down logically. Step 1. Antarctica's ice is ancient, but not eternal. We know it wasn't always frozen. Geological core samples show periods where vegetation thrived, meaning any structures built then could have been preserved as the ice advanced. Step 2. The locations of these anomalies are not isolated. They're arranged along patterns that echo known ancient architectural alignments. These aren't random peaks, they form a grid. You ever wonder why the so-called ancient pyramids across the globe seem to follow similar blueprints? Because geometry doesn't belong to one culture. It's a universal code. Every advanced builder in history, Egyptian, Mayan, Olmec, Sumerian, obsessed over the same proportions, the same celestial references. What if they weren't independent inventions, but echoes of a source older than all of them? Antarctica fits that puzzle like a missing cornerstone. Let me hit you with this. Temperature anomalies have been recorded near certain sub-ice structures, localized heat signatures, small but consistent. You don't get that from solid rock at -80 degrees. That kind of heat means energy, possibly geothermal activity, or something synthetic. Something active. If a facility or structure beneath the ice still emits measurable heat, that means it's not dead. That's not geology, that's engineering. And it gets stranger. Under the ice there's a massive freshwater body, Lake Vostok. It's sealed beneath for kilometers of ice, untouched for millions of years. When Russian teams drilled down and collected samples, the data was immediately classified. We got one short statement, unidentified microbial life. Then silence. No detailed reports, no photos, no transparency. That kind of secrecy isn't about microbes. That's about something too complex or too inconvenient to explain. If what they found wasn't just biology, but remnants of technology, structures, artifacts, or machines, you'd never hear about it. Ask yourself, why are certain coordinates in Antarctica blocked from civilian satellites? Why are Google Earth sections blurred out, pixelated, or mysteriously replaced by artificial snow textures? That's not a glitch. That's curation. Somebody's editing what you're allowed to see. You can look anywhere else on Earth in real time, but the second you zoom in on these zones, the image collapses. Coincidence? Not a chance. Now let's talk scale. These aren't small features. Some of these formations span tens of miles. That's city-level architecture if it's artificial. We're talking about structures that, even partially revealed, would dwarf modern buildings. Imagine a complex larger than Manhattan, encased in ice, perfectly preserved. The question isn't if it's there, it's how deep they're willing to dig before they admit it. We also have the recurring reports, pilots flying supply routes claim to have seen dark circular openings in the ice, massive enough to fit aircraft. Official records? Classified. Images? Gone. But those testimonies match the coordinates of geothermal hotspots, regions where ice melts faster from below. Natural vents, they say. Sure. But some of these vents are perfect ovals, smooth-rimmed, and symmetrical. Nature doesn't carve portals. Builders do. Here's what we're piecing together. Beneath the ice lies a network of geometric formations, heat signatures, magnetic anomalies, and subsurface cavities connected by linear tunnels. When you map those lines, they converge toward one central region, deep inland, near the magnetic South Pole. That's the bullseye. That's the control center, if we're looking at a buried civilization. And let's not forget, ancient myths across multiple continents describe gods retreating to the ends of the earth, to a land of eternal night, before the Great Flood. The language may be poetic, but the concept is identical. The rulers of an earlier age withdrew to a hidden domain beneath ice and darkness. It's almost like those stories were warnings, not fantasies. Some analysts believe the structures under Antarctica could be more than ruins, that they might be technological vaults. Imagine power systems frozen in stasis, machines designed to withstand a global cataclysm. The ice isn't the grave, it's the lock. The moment we melt it, we could be waking up something that hasn't moved in 10,000 years. Let's go further. If those structures were built by a pre-human civilization, we'd expect materials we can't explain, alloys that resist decay, crystalline composites immune to freezing. And guess what? Fragments of unknown metallic composition have already been quietly catalogued by drilling teams. You won't see the data, but the scientists involved? They suddenly get reassigned, their communication sealed. That's not standard procedure for geological discovery. That's containment. Now I want you to think about how deep the ice runs, almost 3 kilometers in some places. That's an incredible preservative. A time capsule. Whatever sits below isn't destroyed, it's suspended. If a city existed down there, its buildings could still stand, its artifacts intact, maybe even its energy sources dormant but recoverable. That's not fantasy, that's physics. Ice is the perfect preservative. And that means the pyramids we detect may only be the tip, the peaks of much larger complexes buried further down. What we see as isolated mountains could be the summits of colossal structures still hidden. Entire networks, entire landscapes of architecture, unseen for tens of thousands of years. When you start piecing the evidence together, the geometry, the heat, the restrictions, the disappearances, it starts looking less like mystery and more like management. Someone is managing the discovery curve. They want you curious enough to click, but not informed enough to connect. They release small breadcrumbs, ancient pyramid under ice, scientists find strange anomaly, then drown it in silence. The goal isn't to deny, it's to delay. Because once the full structure emerges, there's no going back. You can't call it natural once the corridors line up with magnetic north, or when the stone density matches advanced cutting techniques. You can't explain that away as glacial pressure. That's precision, that's design. We also have to consider logistics. There are already multinational installations across Antarctica, research bases, supposedly for climate science. But satellite footage shows heavy equipment movement, deep core drilling rigs, and heat sources inconsistent with research outposts. These aren't simple labs, these are industrial setups. Somebody's digging for something. And if they're digging for relics, not ice samples, then they already know the truth. They're not exploring, they're excavating. Controlled excavation, hidden under the banner of research. And once they reach whatever's down there, the data won't go public. It'll vanish behind the same veil that's covered every disruptive discovery before it. So let's recap this chain: geometric structures beneath the ice, aligned along magnetic axes, consistent heat signatures from subglacial anomalies, restricted zones preventing civilian verification, classified findings from deep drilling, massive logistics consistent with controlled excavation. Add that together, and the picture forms itself. Beneath Antarctica's ice, we're not looking at random geology, we're looking at the fossilized remains of a built environment. The destruction wasn't an accident. It was precision. A calculated planetary reset disguised as a natural event. What wiped the pre-Adamite world off the map wasn't just climate chaos, it was targeted extinction. The event that buried Antarctica and shattered the global grid wasn't random geology, it was an engineered clean slate. And if you connect the evidence, impact signatures, abrupt sea level rise, magnetic field distortions, it looks like someone hit delete on an entire epoch. Around 12,000 years ago, something tore through Earth's stability. Temperature spikes of more than 10 degrees in mere decades. Massive meltwater floods. Global rainfall patterns collapsing overnight. That's not slow evolution, that's surgical annihilation. The Younger Dryas event didn't just end the Ice Age, it erased an entire civilization layer we were never supposed to know existed. The flood myths? Every single one, from Sumer to the Andes to the Arctic tribes, is describing the same event, the purge. The reset. The liquidation of the old world. What the mainstream calls mythology is the smoking gun of a cataclysm so severe it left trauma in human memory for tens of millennia. It's not poetry when dozens of cultures describe the sky turning to fire, the oceans rising, and the sun dimming. It's a record. Oral data. And the coordinates all point to the southern hemisphere. Antarctica was ground zero. Think about what happens when a continent collapses under ice. Entire mountain ranges sink, coastlines vanish, ecosystems flash freeze. The air itself becomes a weapon, oxygen crystallizing in seconds. If there were cities, temples, or energy grids, they weren't destroyed, they were entombed. Frozen mid-pulse. The same way Pompeii froze a single scream, Antarctica froze a whole world. And here's the catch, when the dust settled, the survivors weren't gods, they were refugees. Scattered remnants of a lost high culture carrying fragments of knowledge to rebuild. That's why you see sudden explosions of civilization in multiple places after the event: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Andes. They didn't invent it from zero, they remembered pieces of something they'd already lived. Every pyramid, every ziggurat, every megalithic alignment is a broken echo of the mother civilization that drowned beneath the ice. The pre-Adamite world wasn't destroyed for fun. It was wiped because it broke the order. They weren't meant to exist free, autonomous, unbound by control. They mastered something, maybe planetary energy, maybe consciousness itself, that made them ungovernable. Whatever controlled this realm decided to start over. You call it God, the gods, the architects, the system. The name doesn't matter. What matters is, something pulled the trigger. And don't think this was a one-off meteor. Look at the precision of the damage, concentrated along magnetic fault lines, impact craters perfectly distributed to destabilize global climate zones. That's a strike pattern, not cosmic chance. The pole shift that followed wasn't coincidence, it was the reset mechanism. The world tilted, oceans rebalanced, the memory of what came before got drowned, burned, and frozen simultaneously. The geological record is brutal. Layers of black matte, soot, glacified sand, carbonized biomass, covering continents. A literal burn scar separating two worlds. That's not slow climate change, that's a flash event that torched the biosphere. If you were on Earth when that hit, your sky would have looked like hell, raining fire, boiling seas, continents cracking open. And under the South Pole, a civilization that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years simply vanished overnight. But here's what most people miss: the timing lines up with the sudden genetic bottleneck in early humans. You can trace it in DNA. The population crash wasn't random plague or famine, it was a planetary cleansing. Only select groups survived. That's why the myths always say the gods chose a few to carry on. Chosen, not lucky. Preserved, not spared. That's population control on a scale we can barely comprehend. What came after was reconstruction under supervision. The survivors were scattered across strategic zones, fertile valleys, river deltas, equatorial refuges. They were seeded with fragments of old knowledge but stripped of context. That's why you see sudden jumps in engineering, astronomy, agriculture, out of nowhere. The blueprint wasn't new, it was inherited. The pre-Adamite archive, transferred through survivors, repackaged as divine revelation. Now, follow the energy trail. After the event, Earth's magnetic poles shifted, burying entire networks of power conduits beneath the ice. What once were resonant energy lines became dead circuits. The planet's resonance dropped, literally a frequency downgrade. Civilization went dark, both physically and metaphysically. The knowledge of how to manipulate natural energy grids vanished. Humans devolved into survival mode. That's why history begins with agriculture instead of technology, because it was the reboot phase of a controlled system. And here's where it gets even uglier. The flood wasn't just physical, it was informational. Libraries, archives, crystalline data vaults, all obliterated. You don't need to erase every artifact if you can drown the network. Water and ice are perfect data erasers. What little survived became sacred texts, rewritten in allegory to hide the original context. The fall of Atlantis, the deluge of Noah, the sinking of Mu, same story, different branding. The pre-Adamite extinction wasn't about morality, it was about containment. They reached a level of understanding that challenged whoever manages this system. They could have found a way to break out, maybe through dimensional access, maybe through consciousness transfer. The flood reset the simulation. That's why the new world begins with fear, obedience, hierarchy, a total inversion of the pre-Adamite ethos. From creators to caretakers, from masters of energy to servants of labor. Antarctica became the tomb. The perfect lock. A layer of ice so thick and unforgiving it could hide the truth for tens of millennia. But ice doesn't just preserve, it records. Within it are trapped particles of the ancient atmosphere, alien isotopes, unknown gases, anomalies that don't match natural processes. You melt that ice, you melt the evidence. That's why the rush to study climate change includes drilling deep cores, not just to measure but to monitor what's emerging from that ancient vault. Some of those ice cores contain microscopic metallic shards, nanoscopic alloys with no natural origin. That's not glacial debris, that's residue from technology. It's proof of combustionless manufacturing, something way beyond anything early humanity could have built. And every time new cores are analyzed, the data disappears into private research contracts. You never see it published. You just hear anomalous readings. You think the melting is accidental? No. The system knows the ice is bleeding secrets. That's why the geopolitical race for Antarctica is intensifying. Every superpower wants a piece of whatever's buried there, not fossils, not microbes, but history's black box. The final proof that this civilization didn't evolve from chaos, it survived annihilation. The ancient maps showing Antarctica without ice weren't prophetic. They were remnants, memory passed down from sailors who carried charts older than written language. When those maps resurfaced in the early modern era, they shattered academic logic. But instead of admitting the obvious, that someone had mapped the continent before it froze, the establishment buried it under coincidence. That's not coincidence, that's control. Imagine the moment before it happened. The pre-Adamite engineers watching the skies as something approached. Maybe they knew it wasn't just a storm or a rock. Maybe they understood the precision behind it. Imagine the silence before impact, a civilization at the peak of its power realizing it was about to be deleted. No warnings, no miracles, no saviors. Just white light, thunder, and silence. The ultimate censorship. And when the world thawed again, humanity emerged into ruins it couldn't recognize, vast skeletons of architecture jutting from new coastlines, metal artifacts it couldn't replicate. So they did what survivors always do, they turned their trauma into religion. They called the ones who came before gods and the event judgment. They forgot the truth, that it wasn't divine wrath. It was a reset protocol. You can still trace the scars. Under Greenland, under the Sahara, under the Ross Ice Shelf, burn layers, micro-diamonds, impact glass. All dated to the same window of destruction. The same instant the magnetic poles went haywire. The same instant human history began. You think that's coincidence? It's the reboot timestamp. The Earth reinitialized, and a new species was installed on top of the ruins. And that's why the pre-Adamite story matters, not as myth, but as forensic evidence of a planet-sized operation. The flood wasn't punishment. It was maintenance. A scheduled purge to clean the slate, bury the architects, and hand the surface back to controllable life. Antarctica is the hard drive. The ice is the encryption. And the melt, the slow, creeping thaw of the 21st century, is the decryption key. Let's talk about what's really going on right now, not thousands of years ago, but beneath our feet, under the ice, at this exact moment. Antarctica isn't just a frozen wasteland or a research zone. It's an active operation. A global vault, a fortress for data, DNA, and secrets older than recorded time. While the public narrative is about scientific collaboration, the truth is it's one of the most militarized and restricted territories on Earth. Nobody gets in without clearance, and nobody who's been deep enough ever talks about what they've seen. You've heard of bases, right? Research stations? Those sterile little hubs in government photos with a few scientists and flags? That's the public layer, the Disneyland version. But dig beneath that surface and you find a classified grid, black site installations, subterranean facilities, entire zones off limits even to allied nations. The official excuse? Safety. The real reason? Containment. What's being contained isn't radiation or disease, it's knowledge. Artifacts. Something non-human, non-modern, still functioning under the ice. Satellite scans reveal heat signatures in areas where no geothermal activity exists. You don't get perfectly circular hotspots in an environment that cold unless something is generating power. We're talking energy emissions measured in terawatts, pulsing rhythmically, like a heartbeat. And every single one of those coordinates is sealed under international treaty. You can't even fly over them without triggering military alerts. Think about that. Every desert, every mountain, every ocean can be mapped freely, but the one place that could expose the truth about our origins is completely locked down. Now, here's what insiders have whispered for decades: there's something ancient operating down there. Not just structures. Technology. Self-sustaining systems that predate recorded civilization. Possibly pre-Adamite. Possibly something else. Whatever it is, it's active. Instruments have picked up low-frequency electromagnetic bursts coming from beneath the ice, consistent, timed, intelligent. These aren't natural seismic tremors. They're patterns. Somebody, or something, is still sending a signal. And the timing is strange. The first major reports of these signals coincided with the collapse of several ice shelves. Like the Earth itself was reacting. It's as if the ice is both shield and prison, and as it melts, whatever's been locked inside for 12,000 years is stirring. You think it's coincidence that the world's elite suddenly got obsessed with climate change research in Antarctica? No. That's the cover operation. They're not saving the planet, they're monitoring a reawakening. Pay attention to who's been there: heads of state, intelligence directors, CEOs of aerospace corporations, even religious leaders. None of them went there for penguins and snow. They were briefed. They saw something. Because Antarctica is the one location where the veil between past and present breaks down, where history and secrecy overlap in real time. Whatever is buried there connects ancient power to modern control. And here's the twist: what if Antarctica isn't just a ruin? What if it's an archive built intentionally, a failsafe left by the previous world's architects? A repository designed to outlast cataclysm, holding the last remnants of their knowledge and technology? That's why so many expeditions end in silence. Not because they failed, because they found something that changes everything. Imagine walking into a subterranean complex frozen in time, perfectly preserved, walls of alloy unknown to modern metallurgy, symbols carved in languages no human tongue has spoken in 50,000 years, machines humming faintly like they've been waiting for a reboot. You don't announce that. You lock it down. Multiple nations are drilling deeper every year under the pretext of ice core research. But the data never goes public. The samples go straight to private labs, often owned by military contractors. What they're really doing is extracting preserved genetic material, not fossils, but tissue. Samples with viable DNA. That's not research, that's retrieval. You're looking at the early stages of resurrection science, the attempt to bring back the genetic blueprint of the pre-Adamite race. They want their technology, their biology, their control. Now connect this with the increase in classified Antarctic air traffic, cargo planes running with no transponders, helicopter units vanishing off radar, logistics hubs being built near the South Pole under full secrecy. They're not hauling food. They're hauling containment units. You think I'm exaggerating? Even Google Earth has blurred entire mountain ranges. Try it yourself, zoom in near Queen Maud Land. It's pixelated beyond recognition. They literally airbrush reality. This isn't about conspiracy, it's about control of the narrative. If humanity discovers a civilization that predates all religion, all recorded history, and possibly possessed a higher technology than we do, the power structures crumble overnight. The financial, political, and spiritual monopolies lose their grip. The divine origin model collapses. That's why the truth about Antarctica will never be taught, it'll only be managed. Some whistleblowers describe massive halls beneath the ice, carved from black stone that absorbs radar, lined with crystalline pillars emitting faint light. Others speak of vertical shafts descending miles into geothermal caverns where machines the size of cities hum silently. The deeper they went, the less human it felt. Some teams never returned. Those who did came back changed, silent, paranoid, and sworn under layers of national secrecy acts. The official excuse, psychological breakdown due to isolation. Sure, because psychological breakdown sounds better than contact with something ancient and alive. There are also rumors of a massive metallic object buried at the magnetic south, perfectly hemispherical, hundreds of meters wide. Ground-penetrating radar shows uniform density, unnatural composition. It's not a rock. Some say it's a craft. Others, a generator. Some think it's the central core of an ancient planetary grid, the last node of a system that once powered the entire Earth. Whatever it is, they're terrified of it. And that fear explains everything, the treaties, the secrecy, the sudden bursts of global polar research funding. They're trying to understand how to control it before it activates on its own. You can sense how tense this game has become. Every nation pretends to cooperate, but each one's racing to uncover the key first. If this technology is real, if it can manipulate gravity, time, or energy, whoever unlocks it first rules the next epoch. Not metaphorically. Literally. The pre-Adamite power source might be the crown jewel of the old world, the engine of creation itself. And it's sitting under a frozen desert guarded by treaties that read like modern commandments. Meanwhile, scientists who've tried to speak up keep vanishing. Whole research logs deleted, families silenced, funding pulled overnight. The cover-up isn't messy, it's surgical. Antarctica isn't empty, it's curated. Every inch is monitored. Every discovery is filtered. You and I see the ice, they see the infrastructure. They see the inheritance of a civilization that never died, it just went into hibernation. And maybe that's the real story. Maybe the pre-Adamites never perished completely. Maybe they built the ice intentionally, sealing themselves in stasis until the planet was habitable again. That melting we're witnessing could be part of that design, a planetary wake-up call, not an accident. What if they're still down there, waiting for the environment to reset before resurfacing? That's not science fiction, that's the one hypothesis governments fear most. Because if the original architects return, modern humanity loses its throne overnight. Picture that moment, a deep frequency pulse rippling through the ice, shaking satellites, knocking compasses offline. The planet's core resonance shifting slightly. Scientists call it magnetic anomaly. But you'll know better. That's the heartbeat of the old world coming back online. That's the system rebooting itself. This isn't fantasy. Every indicator, seismic, magnetic, electromagnetic, shows something's changing down there. It's not random. It's timed. controlled, monitored. The ice isn't melting by chance, it's being unlocked by design. The question isn't if we'll uncover what's beneath. The question is when they'll decide we're allowed to see it. And when that day comes, when the first camera drone breaks through and captures the impossible, the world will have two choices: denial or surrender. Because the discovery under Antarctica won't just rewrite history. It will erase it. It'll make everything we've believed, religion, science, civilization, look like kindergarten drawings beside the architecture of the real founders. Antarctica is not the end of the world. It's the basement of it. The core. The storage unit of humanity's first age. The ice was the lock. The melting is the key. And every second it drips away, the truth is getting louder. Thank you for watching, for staying through the end, for having the courage to go this deep with me. You're part of the few who can handle the silence beneath the noise. Stay awake. Stay curious. And thank you, sincerely, for being here.